Hey everyone, it's Brian Robb and Souichi Terada of MassLive.com. We are here to break down a very eventful start to the month of July for the Boston Celtics. We have extensions, we have signings, we have a team up for sale. Souichi, where do we even start?
Where do you? Well, as Woj tweeted at 6 o'clock Sunday, which is when NBA free agency officially started, Luke Cornett was the first Woj bomb of free agency 2024. So that's in some ways, B-Rob, in a funny way. I feel like it was kind of symbolic though, in terms of like the Celtics dominating the news cycle a little bit here on Monday. I personally would like to start with a Derek White extension because that was the first thing that happened Monday. It got overshadowed by his teammates, which happens a lot of the time. Poor Derek, but he got his extension. I believe it was the maximum the Celtics could sign him for, B-Rob, and I thought it was a good move. I mean, especially compared to some of these other contracts around the league, like it's great value. Like Derek White is like an elite role player, and I don't, and obviously Celtics fans are super happy about that. What did you think about the extension happening so quickly?
Yeah, it was certainly a situation where Derek White, when you see some of the contracts that were handed out over the last few weeks, whether it's own teams or when free agency opened up, like his market
Mhm.
was going to be seemed to be quite a bit bigger than the max the Celtics could offer him. So for them to lock him in at that total 125 million or so over 4 more years to lock him up essentially for the rest of the decade, that's a pretty big deal. I feel like since it just seems like that's a deal. It's going to age well. It's like
Yeah.
Derek White. He's durable. He's kind of malleable. You can put him in a bunch of different spots offensively and defensively. And that's the guy, even as he goes into his 30s, you'd think that would age pretty well for him, right?
Yeah, and like I also wonder too if Derek is like, I really like the situation here. Like he makes the Celtics better, the Celtics make him better. So he was kind of like, yeah, let's just take the maximum allowable. Like maybe he could have made more money on the open market, but I think he understands kind of the situation they have and everything. And like realistically, if you're Derek White, like I wrote this piece, like the feature on him a couple seasons ago. Like he started at like the Division 2 level. Like he never expected this. Like after this contract, like he signed a 4 year, $70 million contract with the Spurs. His first extension, like that's almost $200 million in career earnings, right? And like he can obviously sign after this extension. So like I don't th like Derek strikes me as the guy where he's like, yeah, I've made $200 million playing basketball in the NBA. I'm an NBA champion. Like, yeah, like let's have a good time doing this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that kind of went through his mind too a little bit. So, but if you're Derek, you feel great. You see Jason sign the Supermax extension, just a ridiculous number. It's so funny, B-Rob. Like we I saw in the Slack earlier today, like the Patriots signed their, I believe, signed one of their linebackers to like pay him Pritchard money. And I'm like, the NBA, man, it is truly like a different ball game out here. Some of these numbers that are getting thrown around, and here's a little bit of a take, B-Rob, and I saw this on Twitter, but I've believed this for a while. I think we should start talking about NBA contracts in like a percentage form instead of the numbers form, just because the salary cap keeps going up. Like,
Yep.
and I also think this will be very helpful for fans because if you say Derek White takes up X percentage of the salary cap and this bozo on this other team takes up the same percentage of a salary cap and you kind of compare that a little bit, I think that'll help the discourse actually instead of pure raw numbers. So I'm going to start pushing that narrative, B-Rob, but otherwise I kind of went sidetracked here. What did you think of the Jason extension here? I'm very grateful it didn't drag out like the Jalen extension last season and obviously a no-brainer for the Celtics here.
Yeah, this must be probably the most undramatic super max extension in maybe NBA history. Of everyone knew it was coming for 2 years now.
Mhm.
Um, and he's sort of it. The Celtics are happy to give it to him. And now the pressure is not entirely out, but I mean, coming off a championship, it's like the pressure, everyone's like, oh man, Supermax, like that's a lot of money. But it's like, no, like they just won a title. Of course, you're going to give it to him. Like, same with
Mhm.
Jalen Brown. No one's questioning that contract anymore, period.
Yep.
After the season those guys just had. So it is. It's certainly a situation where, to have those guys locked up, like whether both of those guys together. I think it'll be fascinating to see whether Brown and Tatum both like finish their careers or even finish those contracts in Boston. I think
Mm.
Tatum is, the surefire bet to Jalen's a more fascinating case as this decade
Mhm.
rolls on. But there's no doubt that they're coming back full steam ahead with those guys back. And I think your percentage point is phenomenal as far as the
Thank you.
contracts go, Suchi. Here's
Oh
the
man,
problem though.
this is
Talking about
great.
money is more fun than percentages for like the masses. From an informational standpoint, you're 100% right. It makes sense. for a
That's really
talk
funny.
radio standpoint, for the
You're right.
debate game,
You're
that's it's
right.
going to be tough for them to make that do. But
Oh,
at
that's a good point.
MassLive, informationally, you'll get that kind of analysis from us here.
And the funny thing too about the contract stuff, B-Rob, is that I get what you mean by that, but like to me, I always look at like player salaries as like you basically have to have it because of taxes, you know? Obviously it's a little bit
Right.
different with like Dallas and Florida and those states without income tax, but like for the most part, like if you sign a $50 million contract, you're only getting about 25 million. Obviously, you know what I mean, these are ridiculous numbers talking about basketball and everything, but like that's kind of an interesting wrinkle though, B-Rob, in terms of like I understand what you mean though, where it's like Jason Tatum makes $60 million. It's like that's more fun to talk about instead of what is it, 35% of the salary
Mm.
cap or whatever it is. But I think it would lead to more educated fans and more educated discussions,
Easily.
perhaps. But perhaps people don't actually want that. So I'm not sure. But I'm gonna start pushing this. I also think they should do this in the NFL just because quarterback
Mm.
salaries are
Hmm.
ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's like if my quarterback, Jared Goff, is making X percentage of the salary cap, and your quarterback, Daniel Jones, is making only 5% less of the salary cap. It sounds like one of my teams actually knows what they're doing, which is the Lions, which for the first time in my life, I can say that. So I would like to keep saying that if that's cool with everyone here. But it's, getting a little off the rails, but B-Rob, what did you think of the big announcement Monday? We haven't really touched on it. The owner, Wyc Grousbeck, majority owner, putting the team up for sale. We don't obviously still very early. The Celtics statement said this will probably get finished up sometime, maybe even in 2025, which doesn't seem like a real number, honestly, even though that's next year. But what did you think, B-Rob? I personally think this is a great time to sell. You're coming off a championship. You don't have to pay these ridiculous luxury taxes. You don't have to be the bad guy to break up the team. You get to just basically be an owner that has won at least two rings. And my last thought is that I remember sometime last year, Wyc Grousbeck went on the radio and he basically said the die trying or whatever, banner 18 or die trying. But another quote that really struck out to me was like, if you are not willing to pay to keep the Celtics competitive, then it's basically like you have to like kind of like sell the team or like get out of the way. Like you should sell the team to somebody who is willing to pay that money. So I think this is kind of him doing that in some ways, right? Like I think he's 62. Like by the time this is over, I'm sure he'll be later in his 60s. Like he had his fill, right? Like of the championships and everything. So I guess that's my 2 cents. But Bureau, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect quote. I think the recall on that is speaks to the situation itself perfectly right now. Of they are set up to succeed, potentially have a dynasty here, but it's going to be a
Mhm.
very, very costly one for whoever is footing that bill.
Just like the
And
Warriors.
right, and it's when the wing's there and the getting's good, like, and if someone comes in, some deep pocketed group comes in and
Mhm.
wants to be the good guys to keep this thing together amid all the crazy luxury tax penalties, and that's great. I think and that'll make everyone happy.
Mhm.
Um, but if not, then eventually this group is going to have to be start, not fully torn apart, but certainly keep parts are going to fade away, and it won't
Mhm.
be fun to be the person in charge when that happens, to be the one footing the blame for that, if you will. Um,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, and so that's where um, exiting out stage left is a savvy move. Certainly, and this might be, we've seen a lot of places or a lot of teams just go up for sale in the last, what, like 5 years. We're up to like five, six NBA teams have changed
Yeah.
hands at this point. So is this just a time where it's like, are these franchises is like this gonna be a kind of will this be the peak of the Celtics value, if you will, coming off a title and knowing
Mhm.
that this is like
The TV
um
contracts.
TV
Yeah.
contracts, all that stuff's kind of just coming into play. Being is this the perfect time to sell?
Yeah. I think it is, honestly, with the TV. Like, I mean, like the value of these franchises is just worth so much. I am like morbidly curious if there's a point where like they're not going to do so, but like the NBA is
Right.
so popular and it's so popular internationally as well that like I'm just curious like how long can this keep on going? And B-Rob, like you raise a good point in like terms of selling, but like a couple of franchises recently that kind of like popped up for me was one, the Minnesota situation, where obviously that's a little bit messy now. Like I'm sure the NBA is gonna kind of like step in and mediate and make sure everything is cool, just because like it's just bad PR to have like A-Rod and Glenn Taylor like going at each other like this in a public setting. So I'm curious to see how that looks. I think Wick is probably the based off of how much Wick loves the Celtics, I think he's going to try to put them in the best possible situation. Like, I don't think it's just going to be like a highest bidder situation. I am
Yep.
curious to see how that happens. And I don't know, like this Wick transition, because the statement yesterday from the Celtics said that he's going to keep Gunn. He's going to be the governor essentially until 2008 or 2028. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Maverick situation, like Mark Cuban basically selling off his shares, and then they were like, he's going to be the governor through last season, which obviously ended in the NBA Finals berth. And then now he's basically given up the control or whatever, because obviously that's just how ownerships work, right? So it's just I'm a little bit curious to see how when Wick will eventually kind of like leave um kind of the fold here for the Celtics and everything. Obviously, these are all questions that will be answered. It's just going to take a lot of time just because you're dealing with billions of dollars here. But it's at least an interesting wrinkle. I think there's some maybe not necessarily learning lessons, but just like similar situations from other ownerships and other teams trading hands and everything like that. So before we let you go, B-Rob, we need to get your reaction on the big news from Woj in terms of Luke Cornett re-signing with the Celtics and Nemi Esqueda. Uh,
It's the biggest move of the summer. I mean, no, this is yeah, those guys. I mean, Cornette especially has been just a rock solid third center. I mean, that's from a vibe standpoint, on and off the floor. You're not going to do better than Luke Cornette at this point.
he's
At
so
that,
funny, man. He's
right?
so funny.
So
A
now,
lot of fans ask like, "Who's the funniest on the Celtics?" I'm like, "It's Luke Cornett, bro." And
yeah,
his wife, whenever his wife makes baked goods, occasionally we get some. They're very good. Little peeling back
listen,
the curtain a little bit behind the scenes. So, but
win for the team,
that's
win
a
for us.
yeah, right. There were a lot of leftovers. So his teammates clearly were not getting enough of those. But yeah, Luke Cornett, Nemi Esqueda both back. Celtics still have some housekeeping in order in terms of like the roster and depth, and they kind of need like an O'Shea Brissett high energy vibes guy who might not necessarily play, but adds a lot to the team. I think maybe personally, B Rob, I would probably if I were a Celtics fan, I would like to see another big just for maybe a little bit more competition. You just never know with what 38-year-old Al Horford and Kristaps and his injury situation and everything. But for the most part, if I'm a Celtics fan, like you have nothing to complain about. All this free agency drama, I would pop a bag of popcorn and have a good time just because, hey, Paul George might work on the 76ers, but at the end of the day, they're all injured. So all the time, it seems. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, it is a lot of action around the league. Not a lot of action with this roster, and that's good news if you're the defending champion.
Mhm.
And now the question is comes just big picture. Who's coming in, who's going to take over the team? That's an answer that we'll have months and months to probably analyze and figure out as the story develops there. But in the meantime, some housekeeping for the Celtics coming up, some summer league, some Olympics coming up for the Celtics. So we'll be on top of it all at
Mhm.
masslive.com. Make sure you check out our coverage at masslive.com/Celtics. We'll be have a cover for you there all summer long and beyond. But for myself, Brian Robb, for Souichi Terada, thanks for listening, and we will check you guys soon.